So let's talk some more about Trump's anti-immigrant, anti-refugee executive order and some of the excuses that people are making for it and for him. The first thing that people seem to be saying quite a bit to try and defend Trump's executive order, or make it seem like, oh, this isn't as big of a deal as people are making out of it, is they say, well, Obama basically did the same thing. Barack Obama banned visas for people from Iraq for 6 months a couple years ago, and this is all just this is basically the same thing. Okay, so here's why that is horseshit. The Washington Post actually did a story about this yesterday, and it takes you through the facts of what Obama did in 2011. It all stemmed from a case in Kentucky where 2 Iraqis were arrested and charged by the federal government with terrorism charges. So they imposed much harsher, much more extensive background checks on refugees that had been accepted from Iraq and that would be accepted from Iraq from that point forward. And there were a lot of people who were really unhappy about it. And there was a big drop-off in the number of refugees admitted to the United States from Iraq. It dropped from over 18,000 in the year 2010 to over 6,000 in 2011, and then it went back up in 2012 after they sort of got through the logjam, and it was back up to 16,000. The key distinction to keep in mind between what the Obama administration did in 2011 and what Trump is trying to do now is that the Obama administration never banned people from Iraq from entering the United States. There were new restrictions put in place, the vetting process was enhanced, and the allowing of people into the United States from Iraq slowed way down for a little while. But even during that slowdown, people from Iraq were still being admitted to the country as refugees. There was a slowdown, there was an increased scrutiny as a result of an incident where 2 people were arrested and charged. But even after their arrest and their charge, and the fear that there might be an actual problem with Iraqi refugees, even in that situation, there was no ban on people from Iraq coming to the United States, according to a former member of Obama's administration commenting on that Washington Post article, commenting in that Washington Post article, I should say. So any comparison between what Obama did with Iraqi refugees in 2011 and what Trump is doing right now, trying to keep people from 7 majority Muslim countries from entering this country, there is no comparison whatsoever. There is no comparison. And anyone who tells you that what Trump is doing is just the same thing that Obama did a few years ago is either misinformed or they are lying to your face. And either way, that's not someone you should be listening to. Read the Washington Post article, do your own research, find out what President Obama and his administration did in response to what is called the Kentucky case in 2011, and draw your own conclusions. But I am telling you, what Obama did in 2011 was nowhere near the same thing as what Trump is doing right now. So there is no comparison between the two. Fuck off with that. The other comparison that I find myself drawing, and I haven't heard a lot of other people drawing this comparison on social media or in the more traditional media, but I can't help but think when Trump paints this picture of the United States in this terrible crisis, and we're under this terrible threat of Islamic extremist terrorism, I can't help but cast my mind back to the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, when there were nearly 3,000 people killed as a result of a radical Islamist terrorist attack. Members of the Al-Qaeda terrorist network attacked the United States, and 3,000 people were killed that day. And in response to that just unthinkable act of mass murder, one of the things that President George W. Bush did not do was condemn Muslims in general for that act, or take any actions that implied that we ought to condemn Muslims in general for that act, or hold people from Muslim majority countries in higher suspicion than we ordinarily would. In fact, Bush went out of his way to say the opposite. in his first major address, his address to the joint session of Congress on September 20th, 2001, one of the points that he stressed was this is a battle against a network of terrorists. This is not a battle against Muslims. This is not a battle against Islam. This is not a battle against Islamic majority nations. This is a fight against terrorists, and they should not be taken as representatives of Islam, and Muslims should not be mistreated or be subjected to greater suspicion or skepticism because of the actions of these terrorists and this terrorist network that they were acting on behalf of. George W. Bush said that in the wake of 3,000 people being murdered by Islamist terrorists. Think about that. And look, the Bush administration did all kinds of fucked up shit and used 9/11 as the excuse for them doing it, right? They started wars, there was torture, there was extraordinary rendition, there was mistreatment of prisoners. There's all kinds of really regrettable, fucked up shit that the Bush administration did that I am not letting them off the hook for, that I think was just reprehensible and disgraceful, things that we should be incredibly ashamed about and vigilant to prevent from happening in the future. But the one thing that President Bush never did, was to blame Muslims in general or Islam in general for those attacks. And in fact, he made repeated public statements over the years refuting that notion. Now, since 9/11, the total number of people in the United States who have been killed as a result of Islamist or Islamism-inspired terrorist attacks, by my count, is 109. That's in total since 9/11 in the United States. 109 people. And those 109 deaths are tragic. And I don't mean to diminish the importance of those 109 deaths, although that number does include some of the perpetrators of those crimes, so judge that as you will. But in the nearly 16 years since the 9/11 attacks, 109 people were killed, compared to nearly 3,000 on 9/11. And what does President Trump do in his first week in office? Attempt to completely shut down Muslim immigration to this country. What possible justification could this man have? If George W. Bush was willing to stand up in front of Congress and in front of the world after 9/11, when 3,000 people were murdered by Islamist terrorists, and say, we must not blame this on Muslims, we must not blame this on Islam, we must not use the crimes of these few to paint the many peaceful people all over the world who practice some version of Islam, we must not do that. If President Bush did that after 3,000 people were murdered, what possible excuse does Donald Trump have in the absence of anything resembling the threat posed by 9/11 or the atmosphere of fear and paranoia that followed 9/11? What possible excuse could Trump have for taking the action that he has taken? There can be no excuse. There is no practical reason for it. There is certainly no ethical reason or ethical justification for it. It is nothing more than fear and ignorance and bigotry. And it should be called that. It should be called by its name. What Donald Trump is doing is ignorant, it is reckless, it is counterproductive, and it is bigoted. It is religiously intolerant, and it is racist. He's only been in office for a little over a week, and already Trump has done or tried to do so many of the appalling things that he promised to do during the campaign that some of us thought, oh, he won't actually try to do that. He's tried to do or done a whole bunch of it already. So it's going to be a long few years, folks. But we need to keep this up. What happened this week at the airports, what happened last week in D.C. at the Women's March, what's going to keep happening. We need to keep it up. The protests, the resistance, the calling your Congress people, the calling your senators, the making your voice heard, using social media, using your feet, using your bodies, getting out there, getting out in the street, joining together in protest, joining together in resistance, speaking out, acting out. We have to do that. We have no choice. These are the only tools we have left to us. We have to make it clear to Trump, to his people and to the rest of the world that we will not be governed like this. So keep it up. All of us. I say that to myself too. I say that as a reminder to myself. Don't just sit here and make fucking YouTube videos. When the time comes to get out and stand with the rest of the people, I need to do that. And you need to do it too, if it is at all possible for you to do. Stand up, speak out, act out, resist, and look out for each other. See you next time.